Blink and you missed it almost. Mike Tyson destroys Michael Spinks in 91 seconds to retain the undisputed heavyweight championship. We have talked about this before, so let's reminisce a little more. So much buildup. We cannot emphasize this. I say this all the time to the newer boxing fans. You often love this when I say it. The fight fans that think that boxing began in 2009. There actually was boxing in the 70s and the 80s, and this was the biggest of big deals with Tyson fighting Spinks.
There was
because,
boxing in the 60s and the 50s
of
back in the
course there was,
1800s.
but we weren't alive in the 60s and the 50s and the 40s. But I'm just saying, for the millennials that think all of this began with Tyson Fury and Canelo Alvarez in the recent, there was boxing back in the 80s. And the heavyweight title was the biggest of deals. And Michael Spinks had unseated Larry Holmes and stopped him from matching Rocky Marciano's 49-0 perfect record. And now the two of them finally, several years into the process of Tyson becoming undisputed champion in 87, they finally get together in June of 88. And like I mentioned, it takes longer to order at Burger King and get your food than what ended up happening, Dan Rafael.
I've taken pisses that are longer than that.
I don't need to know that. TMI. I'm just saying, if you pull up to the KFC window to get your big box with your mashed potatoes, your coleslaw, and your chicken at KFC, the fight didn't take as long as KFC takes sometimes.
But this was such a, like you said, such a big buildup. I don't think you can, you do because you lived through it.
Mm-hmm.
And, this is when I was, I was a boxing fan as a kid, but I had become a big boxing fan at this point. In large part because of the terror reign that Mike Tyson was on as heavyweight champion. He had defended the title like 6 times. He was knocking everybody out. And there was the HBO had done this elaborate tournament. It wasn't like a single elimination. It took a while to do all the permutations, but Michael Spinks was one of the main guys in it. Obviously, he was the champion, beating Larry Holmes. So he had the IBF title, and he was the lineal champion, obviously, because of that victory. But rather than fight Tony Tucker in a mandatory IBF title defense, he was allowed to do a fight outside of the tournament and ultimately stayed out of the tournament and fought a very lucrative fight that a lot of fans wanted to see against Jerry Cooney.
Yep.
He beat Jerry Cooney, but he got stripped of the IBF title. Ultimately, Tucker defeated Buster Douglas on a Mike Tyson undercard to win the vacant IBF title. And like 3-4 months later, Tyson fought Tucker and won that fight and won the IBF belt and became the undisputed champion. This is back when it was the 3-belt era. So now you have Iron Mike as the undisputed heavyweight champion with the 3 titles, but you had Michael Spinks, who was the undefeated heavyweight champ, who had beaten Larry Holmes twice without the belt, but the lineal title. And so that was the biggest fight in the heavyweight division. It was a huge fight. It took a little while. You had, HBO was right in the middle of trying to get this done, but you had Don King, who was working with Tyson at that point. You had Butch Lewis, who was working with Michael Spinks, who was a very, it's hard enough to do a deal with Don King and hard enough to do a deal with Butch Lewis if you ever knew him before he passed. Now you got the two of those guys trying to make a deal together, and it's like, it was more brutal than some fights.
I'm gonna bring it up twice for nostalgia, but you know what else is in the nostalgia is Donald Trump, the former president, and the night that we're doing this is the presidential debate for the 2024 election. God help us all, Donald Trump and Joe Biden. But Donald Trump was in the middle of this too, because it was his casino that was helping bankroll finally getting this fight made. So you had all kinds of subplots, including in the middle of all of it, Tyson's having marital problems and in the process of being served divorce papers the night of the fight with Spinks.
I don't think it was divorce papers the night of the fight, but he was having problems. He was in the process of separating from Bill Caton, his longtime manager. If you go back in history, you had the managers were Jim Jacobs and Bill Caton. Jim Jacobs was like good cop, bad cop. Jim Jacobs was the one that was close to Mike. He was the good cop role, and Caton was more the business guy, bad cop role. When Jimmy died, unfortunately, it left that space that was not occupied by another person because Mike and Caton were not particularly close, and they were having a lot of different problems. Even though Bill Caton had, along with Jimmy, had managed Mike's career very, very brilliantly and got him to a certain point where making him tremendous amounts of money and everything like that. So they were having their problems, and obviously he was being promoted by King, and as the story goes, and I mean, I've talked to Mike about this. I wrote a story years ago about it where he talked about this incident. There was so much stuff going on. And then when Butch Lewis came into the dressing room and they were complaining about the wrapping of Mike's hands. Mike got really pissed off, and he literally punched a hole in the wall of his dressing room. And then he, later, once it was rewrapped, however many minutes later,
It was
he
it
walked
was
in the ring.
literally like a 15-minute or more delay to unwrap his hands, because Lewis, I still remember this, and I go back nostalgically and watch all of the broadcast, etc., and then the aftermath of it. That on one of the wraps there was a tiny knot, like at the top of it, and Butch Lewis didn't like that. And Butch Lewis almost got into a brawl with a member of the, as it turns out, the Atlantic City Commission, etc., over the knot on top of the hand wrap. And so they had to unwrap Mike Tyson's, I don't know if it was the right hand or the left hand, redo all of it. Meanwhile, everybody's waiting in the Atlantic City Big Boardwalk Hall for an extra 30 minutes for what the heck is going on. Why aren't the main event fighters headed to the ring?
It is highly unusual, by the way, for the person to observe the hand wrapping in some capacity, be the promoter or a promoter. It's usually another trainer or corner person,
right?
Somebody like that that's more experienced in that
And
sense. But anyway,
Kevin Rooney very specifically said, while we're being nostalgic after this, that Butch Lewis did not say anything to Mike Tyson, didn't call him a name that was put out there that he has supposedly called him. Kevin Rooney said he did not say anything to me. He did not say anything to Mike. He had a problem with the guy with the commission, and he was trying to fight the guy from the commission. And we're sitting back going, the hand wrap is legit, and they made him still wrap the hands, and then it led to what we saw in the ring.
If you knew Butch Lewis, he'd fight anybody. Basically, he always wanted to fight somebody. I did not have the greatest of relations with Butch Lewis when he was still around, and I was writing about stuff related to him.
You want me to give you a nugget? You want me to give you an Easter egg if you've not remembered this or seen this? And this is for the fans too. When you go back and watch the HBO pay-per-view broadcast of the final knockdown, the second knockdown, the first one's a body shot. Again, this isn't very hard. It's only 91 seconds. When the second knockdown happens, you cannot see it on the live play-by-play video as that's happening. But when HBO shows the replay and they show the punch, you can see in the background that Larry Hazard, who heads the commission, is up on the ring apron. And Larry Hazard is yelling at Butch Lewis because Butch Lewis is up on the ring apron, screaming and waving his hands. That's literally what he had been doing after the first knockdown. And Larry Hazard is like, "You idiot, crazy man, get off the ring apron waving your hands." All of this was going on while Tyson came across the ring after the Frank Cappuccino had administered the 8 count and blasted Spinks in the head. I kid you not. Go back for the Easter egg and watch the replay. You can see Larry Hazard waving at Butch Lewis like, "Get down. What are you doing?" in the first minute of the fight. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say this was a devastating performance from Tyson. And if you go back in the course of boxing history, you don't find a lot of examples where you have two undefeated heavyweight champions fighting each other, both with a legitimate claim to the title. I mean, you can look at, Muhammad Ali against Joe Frazier, obviously springs to mind because you had Frazier with the belt and Muhammad as the lineal. He had been off because of not going into the army and had been suspended. But anyway, this is a very unusual situation. We saw it with Tyson Fury against Usyk. They were both undefeated, but it's very, very rare. And the question was, who's the real champ? I mean, that's what you got to focus on. Like I said, he had the belt.
It got answered in a hurry.
Yeah, and Spinks was the lineal. But this was Spinks coming to the ring looking petrified, as we've talked about in the past, did not really want to be there. And then Mike Tyson just steams across the ring. Mike Tyson was, what, 21 years old when this happened, or 22 years old? He was still, maybe I think 21 years old when this has happened. You got to put that in context. Now we're talking about fighters that are heavyweight champions that are deep into their 30s, sometimes into their 40s. This was for all the baddest man on the planet, all the fanhood of Tyson and the videos and the highlight reels and all the great knockouts that he had, and the 9-fight title reign that he had in his first reign before he fought Buster Douglas. This was the apex of Tyson's career. He never had a bigger, better night. There was a lot of conversation among astute boxing observers, historians, the longtime beat writers, that after he knocked out Michael Spinks, that Mike Tyson may very well have been anybody who ever lived in the history of boxing on that night. And there was a serious conversation. If you watch the HBO replay of the fight where they convened a panel of top sports writers, Phil Berger from the New York Times and Michael Katz from the New York Daily News, and just the top boxing writers in the country doing a discussion with Larry Merchant, and they were talking about, is he in the conversation with Ali and
Because
Joe Louis and
we
all of them?
can't convey enough. He looked indestructible. At that time, he had now cleaned out the whole heavyweight division. He had KO'd Larry Holmes. He had now destroyed Spinks in one round. You can't overemphasize it. In this time frame, 87, 88, 89, he looked indestructible, like nobody was going to beat him in his early 20s. Little did we know what was waiting once the decade calendar flipped to February of
Well,
1990. But
after he beat,
at this time, it did looked indestructible.
yeah, well, after he beat Spinks, he fought 2 more times against Frank Bruno, who he knocked out in 5 rounds. Then he drilled Carl Williams in 1 round, and then he fought Buster Douglas, and that was the end of the title reign. But never in his entire career did he have a bigger, better night than the night that he beat Michael Spinks. It was the richest fight in boxing history at the time. We talk about the richest fight is, presently is Manny Pacquiao against Floyd Mayweather. There's been others before that: Canelo versus Mayweather, Oscar versus Mayweather, Holyfield versus Tyson, Tyson versus Lewis. But at this
Holmes
time,
Cooney for a while was the most lucrative one a few years earlier, and this far smashed it. Yes.
when in 1988, when these guys fought, this was the biggest fight in the history of boxing in terms of the finances. It was a huge, huge event, and there was a lot of people that thought Michael Spinks had a chance to frustrate and beat Tyson and maybe outbox him and this and that. And 91 seconds. There was people that never even got to their seat that missed the fight because they missed the opening bell.